All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well today. This is the NBA Tournament Strategy Show where we do a quick look back at yesterday's slate, see what went well, see what might not have gone as well, and then we look at today's slate. Just like a quick overview, talk about guys that we like, guys that are in worrisome positions, and then on the pre-lock show, link in the description, feel free to use the promo code BOB for 10% discount if you would like to. On the pre-lock show at 5:30 p.m., we work on the implementation of what we'll be doing on this slate, who are the leverage plays, who we're capping exposure to, and actually running the domination station then. So let's get into the fun stuff. Let's look at last night. For me, last night was one of those weird slates where I was profitable, but not because of my leverage plays. We'll talk about it. This was the $100,000 winning lineup from last night. This lineup was extremely optimal. You didn't see this line in the vast majority of contests you were in. This 370 number was very, very, very hard to hit. And that's mostly due to guys like Harrell. He's someone that a lot of people weren't on last night. Makes sense. I mean, Harrell typically doesn't have a ton of minutes upside, but he can be very efficient with his minutes. We talked about that a little bit on the pre-lock show, but he was not a play for me. Fred VanVleet, we talked about a little bit as well. You can shoot and make threes against this Milwaukee Bucks team. They're tough in the paint, but easier to score on from the three-point line. Fred VanVleet was not a guy I had a ton of exposure to. He wasn't a leverage play, but I did have him in a few lines naturally. So that panned out. Joe Val made sense. We talked about it on this show. He wasn't a leverage player or anything like that for me, but he made sense with Zion and the rest of those guys out, always in a better position. And then Terry Rozier, viable with Kelly Oubre and those guys out, but still not a guy that a lot of people had exposure to. Most people, if they were close to taking down the tournament last night, were in that 360 range. But this is just an extremely optimal line. Most slates, believe it or not, the guy who wins the contest, you could have created a line that scored higher than that. So it's pretty rare that we get lines like this. For me, the reason why I was profitable, like I mentioned, wasn't because of my leverage plays or anything like that. A lot of those missed. JJJ worked out, I think. But really my core plays are what kept me afloat. Like Brunson worked out, McDaniels worked out, Adams worked out, Najee Marshall worked out. CJ McCollum didn't get there, but he didn't really hurt you. So I think I was able to avoid a lot of the bullets that are landmines that hurt a lot of people. So I think that's what kind of helped me out there. But who cares? Who cares about yesterday now? Let's focus on this slate. Let's make sure it's even more profitable because I think we definitely could have done better. But I'm never going to complain too much about a profitable night. Thomas, good to see you, man. B-Dub said so close to taking both minis. I know you were competing for a long time, man. It sucked to see you fall. Pedro said VanVleet line came out of nowhere last night. So did Schroeder. Yeah, I mean, Schroeder made sense. He saw a nice usage increase with LeBron out, so I understood that one. VanVleet, though, yeah, I was on the Siakam side more than the VanVleet side, but it was interesting for sure. Guys, this slate is an interesting one, but unfortunately, one of my guys who I would typically be very interested in on a slate like this, Paul George is questionable on this slate. Of course he's questionable, and of course he's in the last game of the slate. But I mean, that's just going to have to be news that we wait on, or that we pray and hope we get exposure to, or that we get the news for well before lock. But I don't know if we're going to, sadly. Thomas said Reed was tough. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really get on the Reed train. I only had like 2 or 3 people DM me and ask me like, "Hey, what are you doing with Reed?" I was like, "I'm putting a 50% cap on him." And then by the time I did my last run, he didn't show up at all. So he didn't hurt me too much, but I do know he crushed a lot of people. So sorry that one didn't pan out for you guys. Starting off with the first game on the slate, we'll look at the Memphis Grizzlies against the Orlando Magic. The Grizzlies, they have Brandon Clark, TBD. That's huge news. Danny Green is out. So the reason why the Brandon Clark news matters is because Steven Adams is in a really nice spot once again on this slate. But when Brandon Clark plays, Steven Adams' minutes can be a bit more inconsistent and volatile. So you have to be careful of that. Jamie said 3 players this season thus far with the double burger. Yeah, people are going off this year. David said DS put Reed everywhere for me. The DS did before we got the starting lineup. So if you reran the DS at 655-ish, once the starting lineups for the 76ers came in, then he was out of there. I always recommend, like, it always depends on how much time you have available, and that's the risk when it comes to NBA DFS. I always like to try and do a few more last runs right before lock. I already have lines downloaded and uploaded on DraftKings just in case something crazy happens. But then I'll still run the DS once again right there before lock to make sure I'm getting the freshest, most updated insight and projections. So definitely would recommend trying to rerun closer to lock with the lineup changes that happen. So yeah, the Grizzlies, like I said, Steven Adams might not be a core play for me if Brandon Clark plays. If Brandon Clark's out, then I'll be open to playing Steven Adams as much as the DS gives me. On the other side of this game, oh man, I'm sorry. I did it at 6:30. I mean, honestly, I do that sometimes too, and sometimes it works out and it's fine, and sometimes it's not. But like the 6:30 run, yeah, that's brutal, man. I'm sorry that happened. That's tough. It's always brutal when that happens. But new day. Let's try to, hope that it's a little bit of an easier day for us. Kaboom, good to see you, man. Kaboom, good to see you. For the Magic, we have Bol out, which is nice. So that means I don't have to be tempted to playing him because I always like playing Bol. Mo Wagner's out. Jalen Suggs is questionable. That's a pretty big deal. Okiki's out, and then Isaac is out. We've seen Wendell Carter perform well in these spots with Bol out. That really gives him a nice solid minutes floor, which isn't something I was overly concerned about, but it gives me a nice sense of security. I also, the one concern that we did see in the last game was that the coach has been kind of going back and forth with Mo Bamba and Wendell Carter. 2 games ago, he was willing to play them together on the court at the same time. Last game, he started staggering their minutes a little bit again. So that makes Mo Bamba more of a risky play, but I still like Wendell Carter here. And of course, like at 4,300, if the coach reverses it and is willing to give Mo Bamba a few more minutes here, especially with Bol out, I like the spot. Marco said, newcomer, for a newbie, is it worth to pay attention to the sim model before making lineups in the optimizer? No, Marco, what I always do is I run the domination station first, just to kind of see what the slate is looking like, how most people are building their lines. And then I'll utilize the sim model to try and find some low-owned studs who have potential ceilings. So like I look at guys who have any type of percentage here, ideally like in the 1, 2, 3, 4 plus range. But just the sim model helps point me in the right direction of guys I should be paying attention to that have nice upside and ceiling at their price tag. Good question though. So yeah, for me, that's pretty much. I really like this spot for the Orlando Magic in particular. They're really cheap. They're still missing a lot of guys. I think a lot of people still got burned by a few of these guys last slate out, so I think they might be lower owned than they should. On the reverse side, I mean, John Morant and JJJ and some of those guys didn't get there for us due to the blowout because the Charlotte Hornets are god awful. There's definitely a risk of a blowout in this spot as well. But I'm still willing to attack a low-owned John Morant in a really nice matchup. I'm still most likely willing, if the ownership stays low, to take shots on a guy like JJJ, who has a ton of upside in a nice matchup. These are just situations that I'm willing to play, especially on a 4-game slate. Guys who have upside who are low-owned. Outside of that, I think I'm good. I don't think there's anyone else that's too exciting for me. If Jalen Suggs ends up playing, I would be less interested in the guards on the Magic, who I already don't love a ton. Like guys like Fultz and Cole Anthony are just slightly less viable. Moving on to the next game, we have the Boston Celtics against the Dallas Mavericks. For the Celtics, we have Robert Williams, who looks like he's going to be healthy and play. He's not on the injury report. Gallinari is still out with his ACL injury. The Mavericks, McGee appears to be healthy. DFS, Dorian Finney-Smith, is still injured and out. That's big because DFS is a really good defender for defending against the forward spot. And as we know, the Celtics have some pretty good forwards in Tatum and Brown. So a softer matchup than it would appear on paper for the Celtics today. Looks like we have a question from Vic David Figueroa. Sorry if I said your last name wrong. Question, I'm playing a lot of Houston. Is that okay today so I get to Luka? Oh, man. We'll get there. We'll get there. It's fine, though. Yeah, honestly. I don't think this is a situation where we need to try and fade Luka. I think it makes sense to, at least as for now, if we don't get any crazy injury news, I think that's a fine strategy. It's going to be popular. That's why I had a little bit of hesitation, because that's what most people are going to be doing. And so I'll have plenty of lines that have that strategy. But for me, I'm also going to try and target some potential leverage plays, which we'll talk about in the pre-lock show, for ways to get different. And so if my leverage plays end up outweighing my exposure to Luka, then that's just the way it is. So I think it makes sense to attack that, but also still think of ways and brainstorm ways to get different on this slate. Pedro said, never fade Luka. I never say never. Cedric said, what's up? What's up, man? Good to see you, Cedric, always. So for the Mavericks on this slate, Doncic has been fantastic this season. I think this is another fantastic spot for him. I don't love that the Celtics are a solid defense in general, but there's still one that we can attack. Doncic is matchup proof. Fantastic spot for him. Play him as much as you can. On the other side of this, I typically don't like to play opposing teams against the Mavericks because they play at a slower pace. I'm more open to it when it's a 4-game slate. And Jamie, you're spot on correct. The Celtics are fully healthy, which means from a DFS standpoint, they're just like the Patriots. You never know who's really going to produce. And I honestly feel the exact same way. For me, especially on small game slates, I like to wait and see where ownership is. If Tatum and Brown are going to be like 20, 30% owned, I'm not going to try and force exposure to them. But similar to John Morant and JJJ, if they're going to be in like single digit ownership, I'm willing to take shots on them here. So not fantastic plays from like a matchup standpoint or anything like that, but viable plays for me depending on ownership. Also, I'll just kind of let the domination station run, and if it kind of forces them in a few lineups, I'm fine with it. I'm not going to overthink some of these studs if I'm just getting some natural exposure. Pedro said stack Brown and Tatum, then finesse your lineup from there. Yeah, I mean, that's a very unique, like that's why I'm interested in seeing ownership, because if Tatum and Brown are popular, most people aren't going to play them together. So forcing them together is automatically a way of getting different. So for me, it really just depends on where the ownership lies, but viable, interesting spots for sure. Let's see. Outside of that, anything? Am I missing anything? The guards have been a little bit of a crap show, kind of like what Jamie said. When they're healthy, like Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White, they've been rotating some semi-ceiling performances. Pretty hard to predict. Typically, I like to attack them when someone's out. When they're not, I typically just let the domination station decide my fate. Al Horford broke everybody's heart last slate. The way my brain thinks, I typically kind of want to take a shot on that again, but I don't think it makes a ton of sense here. It would probably be me just getting a little bit too cute. So more than likely we'll avoid that. Vic said Tatum and Brown will be super underowned. I agree. That's what I'm expecting, but I just like to wait and see. Jamie said you should invest in a dartboard of slates like this. Honestly, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And that's kind of honestly how I kind of like to, depending on how ownership plays out, if there's a ton of a strong core that I have like 70 to 80 plus exposure to, I'm willing to take more shots and get leverage on more of these low owned studs because most people just don't play that way. And that's usually how I can take down contests that way on smaller slates. Either take them down or lose by a lot. Boom or bust strategy, but I like to play that way. Risk mitigation, you have to decide for yourself on those. Next up, we have the Utah Jazz against the Houston Rockets. For the Jazz, they only have Colin Sexton out, so relatively healthy. The Rockets have Eric Gordon listed as unlikely to play, so another guy that would be a solid value play on this slate is probably going to be out. Jae'Sean Tate is TBD. When Eric Gordon's out, we talk about this a lot. It's really Jabari Smith and Jalen Green who typically benefit the most in these spots. So, assuming Eric Gordon doesn't play, I'll have plenty of exposure to Jabari Smith and Jalen Green just because these are the performances where they tend to do best. Also, I have some interest in potentially making Shungen a leverage play. You can play bigs against this Jazz team. I like it. I like the spot, and the price tag isn't too crazy. So as long as ownership stays low on him, I'm willing to take like a 10%, 20% shot on a guy like that. Vanderbilt has proven he has a ton of upside. He's been a leverage play for me on quite a few slates, and more often than not has been coming through. It's funny because historically I've called myself not like a Vanderbilt or McDaniels kind of guy, but I've been getting them right here lately. So definitely going to jinx that, and Vanderbilt will probably suck today. Kind of like last night on the pre-lock show, I was like, yeah, I always get Keegan Murray wrong. I do think he has some upside here. I think he's an interesting play. I'm not going to play him for you guys, so you guys should play him. And he had a pretty good day yesterday, if I'm remembering correctly. Could be wrong. Jamie said recency bias is a dangerous thing in DFS or sports betting, especially that time where the whole industry was pretty much capping Joe Val and the dude went off. Yeah, the good thing for me is I do have recency bias, and usually I'm pretty good at spotting it, but my memory is not the best, so I forget what happened on the last slate pretty much almost immediately, unless it was something glaring, like a lot of people were upset about it, like kind of like Reed last night. But I just having a short-term memory helps you a ton in DFS. You're so right. Vic said, when I win a slate, I will buy a subscription. Appreciate that, man. Appreciate it. I know you gotta have priorities. I always understand that. Cedric said Shungen has been playing well. Yeah, agreed. Vic said I had Joe Val last night with McCollum. Awesome. That line was probably looking really nice. Jamie said having two players with the same name on the OKC is a crime. That should not be allowed. Sleeper of the night when PG is rolled out is Luke Kennard. Okay, Miss Cleo vibes. I see you, man. I see you. Another guy who I think is viable here, and again, just I like taking some of these dart throws depending on the ownership. I think Markkanen might actually get some ownership on this slate. It wouldn't shock me. I talk about this all the time, but a lot of guys have their best performances against a lot of these really bad teams like the Rockets and Spurs. I'm always open to taking shots on guys like Markkanen and Clarkson against these really bad teams. For me, which one I choose will more than likely depend on ownership, but I'm fine with both. I'll more than likely have exposure to both. Malik Beasley, we've been on for a long time. When Colin Sexton's out, he's been having these ceiling performances, mostly due to having a more solid floor. His price tag has increased. He's no longer the great value he was. So I'm not quite certain what I want to do with him yet, but I'm interested. Kevin Porter Jr., we didn't talk about. He's pretty much the star guy on their team. I think I prefer Jalen Green due to the price tag, and if their ownership's going to be similar, then that makes the decision a little bit easier for me. But we'll see. All right, guys, last game on the slate. Yeah, Pedro. Markkanen will be over-owned. Matchup is too pretty. Yeah, I agree. It's painful, though. It's like, guys, like, are we really that open to getting hurt again as a community? I didn't know everybody was okay with that. But, I mean, it's going to be hard to fade. It's going to be really hard to fade. Vic said Joe Val fouled out his last two games and people were scared to play him. Yeah, exactly. It's weird because on this show yesterday, I talked about him and I was like, this is a good spot. I like it. And then I completely forgot about it too. So sometimes, like, even though I wasn't afraid, I just forgot about it with all the other games going on. Uh, it's a rookie mistake, but it happens. Kelly looks good today in Utah, but nothing else for me. That's another like potentially sneaky play depending on ownership, especially if everyone's going to Markkanen. Kelly O could make sense here. Vic is saying Eric Gordon will go off today. Are you cheating? Have you looked at the sim model? It likes him a lot too. Jamie said, never would have thought that the Jazz would be one of the faster paced teams this season. I guess the reason why they were slow was Rudy Gobert. Yeah, which is why it was really weird that the Timberwolves picked him up. But, you know, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? All right, guys, we have the last game on the slate. I talked about it. The biggest news for me is Paul George being questionable. Paul George is a elite defender. So if Paul George is out, the matchup already becomes softer for the Nuggets. If he's out, guys like Kawhi Leonard will be the super chalk on this slate, and for a fantastic reason. And then Zubac is also just really cheap and has a ton of ceiling here. I don't remember exactly if this was one of the matchups he exploded against, but I remember Zubac having a really good stretch of games, so we know he has a ceiling. The concern with him is always in regards to his minutes. But I'm willing to take shots on him. I think he'll be relatively popular, though, so that's not a sneaky play. Batum's out. I mentioned that. We've already had some people mention it in the chat. But with Paul George out, you can start taking some shots on guys like Luke Kennard. Even like Terrence Mann is slightly more viable than he was before. They both are more interesting on this slate. Whereas if he plays, those guys are really more so you're playing for like a blowout narrative or really just kind of like a last low-owned, last piece kind of guy. I like playing guards against the Nuggets. You guys know that. But when it comes to John Wall and Reggie Jackson, it's hard for me just because they split minutes and it's hard for them to have a ceiling performance. If I had to pick one, same price tag, I think I would lean in John Wall's direction, but I need to dig a little bit deeper into the minutes there for me to feel really solid about that. But potential leverage plays for sure for me. Vic said I have Aldama in my lineup today for GPP. Yeah, on a 4-game slate, I think that's fine. No issue with that at all. Then on the other side of this, we have the Nuggets. Whoa. That was not the Nuggets. Again, the Nuggets are relatively healthy. I don't love playing Jokic at this price tag when they're healthy, so I more than likely won't be doing that unless his ownership is criminally low. Then I will. Jamal Murray, I think, is viable, but not my favorite play on this slate. I think there's guards in better spots. Vic called it, I believe. Yeah, Aaron Gordon is in a really nice spot. Solid price tag, nothing too crazy. I like him a lot more if Paul George ends up being out. I think Michael Porter Jr. is also viable here at this price tag, and that's probably the most I get of this team on purpose. I think the domination station will more than likely toss in a little bit of Brown and KCP, and I'm okay with that, but they won't be above like 20 or 30% exposure for me. So, yeah, guys, that's pretty much how I'm treating this slate. Nothing crazy. Hopefully we don't get too much crazy injury news. Ideally, we do find out what's happening with them beforehand, but we will see. Vic said Powell looks good if PG's out. Powell looks better than he does without him out. Powell should see an increase in minutes, so definitely viable on a 4-game slate. What concerns me with Powell is his low usage rate. And so let's see, how much is he? Because like we've seen it already. Like at 5,200, yeah, like he wouldn't be a must play for me, but he's just slightly more interesting. I think it's important to realize that there's a lot of risk involved when it comes to Powell, just because he can play for 20, 25, 30 minutes and do absolutely nothing, especially if Kawhi's really going off. But he's not someone that I don't want to have any exposure to. Yeah, Zubac could definitely crush tonight on this slate. I like the spot too. All right, guys. Well, I look forward to seeing you guys on the pre-lock show. That will be at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we're almost at 10,000 followers. I think we only need like 50 or so more. So if you guys could subscribe, that'd be awesome. We have a lot of great NFL content from some GOATs. So I would highly recommend just making sure that you're at least aware of that content if you aren't already. So have a good one, guys. I'll see y'all later. Peace out.